Hello, welcome to Contemplations. I'm Josh, and I'm joined by John.
Hello, I'm John. Welcome to the podcast of the Lotus Eaters.
Right, so what we're going to be talking about today is obviously the culture and politics of Scotland, but what we're also going to have to start with the geography and a bit of the history, of course, as always.
Because you can't appreciate Scotland without the beautiful geography.
Exactly. So, first and foremost, here is a topographic map of Scotland. As you can see, you've got the lowlands in the south on the border with England. Then you move up a bit on the kind of mainland part. You've got obviously the Highlands, as everyone knows. Then you've got the Inner Hebrides on that kind of western coast. And then you go further out, you've got the Outer Hebrides, and then you go up to the northern tip, you've got the Orkney Islands, and then you go even further along and you've got the Shetland Islands.
So lots of islands.
There are lots of islands, indeed. So, first and foremost, something very iconic is Ben Nevis, the highest mountain in the UK. There it is. It's very nice. One day I will climb that thing, I imagine. Apparently, the summit is about 1,345 metres above sea level. So,
I think for people in mountainous countries, it's a bit tiny, but
yes,
for a British mountain, it's reasonable. It's also not very hospitable on the top, so it presents a good challenge.
Absolutely. So, next one is Loch Lomond, view from Ben Lomond,
Whoa, look at that.
which is the largest lake in Great Britain by surface area. I've been there. I've been fishing there. Caught some mackerel.
Bigger than Loch Nevis in Northern Ireland.
It's Great Britain rather than the whole UK.
Okay.
I've added that because there's quite a few in Northern Ireland that spoil it. Makes it look less impressive. I'm just like, by the way, Northern Ireland is much bigger, but still.
But it's probably not as pretty as that as well.
It's also 502 foot deep in the deepest part as well. Yeah. You also, I believe it's salt water, so you get seals and things like that.
Wow.
At least there were when I was there. And then there is the tallest waterfall in Britain as well. Here we are. I am going to struggle to pronounce this. Yeah, how am I going to approach this?
It looks like Esa Qual Alwyn,
That's pretty good.
but it's probably not.
That sounds about right to me.
Okay.
Which is 658 feet tall, which is 3 times higher than the Niagara Falls for a frame of reference. And then we move on to some of the Scottish islands, which there are 790. So only 130 of these are actually inhabited, though.
There's a big difference in the culture, I think, between the islands of Scotland and the centre as well, because the islands were occupied by Vikings for a lot of its history.
Yes, that's right. So before the Vikings arrived, we've got some relics of the Neolithic past. So here on the Orkney Islands, we've got the rings of Brodgar, which, as you can see, it looks relatively bleak there. There's not many trees around. I think that's because of the coastal winds and things like that. And I think a lot of the sea salt gets blown up onto the land. So it makes trees not
this is like the Scottish Stonehenge, is it?
It's one of many Neolithic sites. They've got quite a few. There are quite a few preserved houses as well.
Imagine living in the islands of Scotland before central heating.
Does make you cold just thinking about it, doesn't it? Then we've got a nice sandy beach in Coral Beach on the Isle of Skye here.
There's no actual coral there, though, is there?
As far as I'm aware, no.
Yeah.
But it looks nice. Nice sands, nice blue water, although I imagine it would be absolutely freezing all time.
Great contrast as well between the white beach and the green and then the blue sea.
Then we move on to Quirang on the Isle of Skye, which is waterfall. This is, I think, part of the fairy pools on the Isle of Skye, but it's particularly nice. It's become a tourist destination in more recent years, really.
If it is beautiful Scottish geography you want to see, the Isle of Skye is absolutely representing as far as Scotland is concerned.
And then we get another one of the fairy pools as well, which just looks very clear. Bet you could drink that without having to treat it, can you?
Yeah, but you probably wouldn't want to go skinny dipping.
Huh?
You probably wouldn't want to go skinny dipping as it would be freezing cold.
Yeah, and it's a major tourist attraction.
Oh,
so
and that, yeah. Don't do that.
you'd be arrested. You'll be escorted away in the news. That's some Shetland Ponies that we've moved on to there,
Ooh, yeah.
which are quite honestly quite adorable. I really want to stroke them on the head. But that's one of the main things you think of when you think of the Shetland Islands is Vikings and ponies.
Because they're basically mini ponies, aren't they? So they're very economical, I imagine, in that they can haul a plough or whatever it is you want them to do. But also they're quite small, so they don't take loads and loads of feeding. They've got low surface area, so they don't get blown away by the strong winds. Lots to love. So they're fluffy.
So moving on to some of the man-made stuff, I suppose, around Scotland that's notable. We've got the Jacobite over the Glenfinnan Viaduct, which is the kind of viaduct which people know from Harry Potter with the train going over the top.
Yep.
Next, we move on to Edinburgh Castle. There we are. Obviously, very historic building. Recently had some activists raid it, I believe, and they were talking about things we can't discuss on YouTube. Things to do with certain medical treatments.
Oh, yeah.
And they took it over briefly before being arrested. But yeah, very iconic. It looks over the city of Edinburgh from a big high hill, and you can obviously go and visit it. Then we move on to the Forth Bridge, which is something that reminds me of my grandparents. They would always use the analogy of, oh, it's like painting the Forth Bridge, meaning a never-ending job because it was considered as being so laborious, it being a long bridge.
Having a huge amount of surface area. It'd be very hard to paint.
So yeah, it's used as a phrase in Scotland to mean a task that's basically never-ending or so long that once you've finished it, you start again. Supposedly it's 2,529 metres long and 100 metres high, and was the largest cantilever span in the world when it opened in 1890.
That's pretty cool.
So that has meant that it is recognised as a World Heritage Site along things such as the Great Wall of China, the Acropolis and the Taj Mahal.
I mean, I feel like it is a bit disingenuous to compare them, but...
I don't know what you're on about. Great Wall of China's got nothing on that. They wouldn't have been able to do that when the Great Wall of China was built. That's way more impressive.
That's true. But to be honest, I think Scotland needs more walls than bridges.
They've already got two. They've got Hadrian's and
the Antonine Wall.
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah, but neither of them are in good enough repair to stop the Scots coming south.
That is true. One other thing we've got more recently than 1890 is the Falkirk Wheel, which opened in 2002. And the idea behind this is that it's a means of raising canal boats up using some kind of centrifugal force. Is that right?
Well, you're just ambushing me there with an object, so I don't know what it does. But
basically, it rotates around and picks up a canal boat that's gone into the little loop, and then it lifts it up to that other canal at the top there. So it joins two canals up together.
Right, but I mean, you would think it's using gravity then.
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm a psychologist, not a physicist, so I'm pulling words out of my behind, basically.
Fair enough.
So one of the final things I'm going to talk about is St Andrew's Golf Course, which, of course, very historic. I think it's one of the oldest golf courses going because golf has its ties to Scotland. I believe it was actually created there, I think.
No, I've been there when I was a wee nipper. Met Tiger Woods. Had a great day out.
Did you actually?
Yeah, briefly.
Oh, well.
I yelled at him.
No, I've never played there, although I am partial to a game of golf. I would like to, though, although it seems to me that having a golf course in Scotland and golf courses being reliant on weather, they don't tend to go together well.
Well, I think it's a very canny choice by the Scots to choose a sport that you can only play 3 days a year.
So moving on to the history, we have an article from Scotland.org, which gives us a timeline of some of the history. And what I've done is I've used this and I've inlaid some pictures, and we're going to talk about some various bits and pieces, but we're basically going to fire through this and then get on to some of the culture and politics, which I think is the meat and potatoes.
Yes, indeed. But the history is so colourful of Scotland.
So,
What's not to love? Everyone's killing each other for thousands of years.
speaking of
Oh, and
which,
there's some culture as well.
it starts off at 10,000 BC, the Paleolithic Era. The period of the earliest known occupation of Scotland by man is the Paleolithic Era, also known as the Stone Age. Hunters and gatherers hunted for fish and wild animals and gathered fruit, nuts, plants, roots, and shells, which you would presume is the domain of a hunter-gatherer, I imagine. I don't know why they felt the need to reiterate that, but moving on to the Neolithic Age of 3000 BC, the earliest prehistoric tools still found surviving in Scotland date from around this time. During the Neolithic Age, Scotland was home to nomadic hunter-gatherers as well as the first farmers who built permanent dwellings. The remains of domestic and ritual buildings from this time make up the heart of the Neolithic Orkney World Heritage
Which we
Site.
showed a little bit of.
Yes, we did, yeah. So there's still lots of remnants of this kind of, I don't know, pre-classical time, I suppose you can call it. And then moving on to the so-called classical era of 124 AD, the Roman Empire.
Ave.
Yeah. North Scotland's recorded history began with the arrival of the Roman Empire. So I believe this is when it's actually documented and written down.
Yeah.
Despite building two impressive fortifications, Hadrian's Wall to defend the northern border and the Antonine Wall across central Scotland to advance it forwards, the Romans never truly conquered Caledonia. Unable to defeat the Caledonians and the Picts, the Romans eventually withdrew and over time retreated away from Britain. Much of the 60-kilometre Antonine Wall survives and is another World Heritage Site, one of 6 in Scotland.
Yeah, and it is quite impressive as well. Although I do love the Scottish claim that the Romans never truly conquered Caledonia, because it is one of those claims which is technically correct.
But they didn't really have the incentive to do it.
My understanding is that they basically took all the lowlands below the Antonine Wall, and there wasn't really anything left to take up north because it was all so inhospitable, so cold, so barren. I may be wrong, but that was my understanding of it. So technically it's correct.
I think that they didn't necessarily have as much incentive to go there because they didn't see it worth their time, really.
Right. It would be very expensive to send an army there, and I don't think they thought they'd get loot or plunder or slaves or anything enough. I have heard one theory that they essentially that they preferred to keep the barbarians at the north so they could harvest them for gladiators, which is a hilarious theory and probably completely ahistorical. I'm sure Scots would make good gladiators.
Oh yeah, I don't doubt it. So around 800 AD is the arrival of the Vikings, which is particularly significant because a lot of the Viking culture still is somewhat around today. So the article says, Vikings were accomplished seamen, and at this point in history, around 800 AD, they began migrating from Norway and Denmark, crossing the treacherous North Sea to trade and settle in Scotland. While Vikings began to settle in the west, the Picts were forging a new kingdom, the Kingdom of Alba.
Yeah, and when I mentioned before about the islands, the Vikings founded what's called the Kingdom of the Isles, which was essentially all of the islands of Scotland. And they had that for a long time until something like 1200, 1300 AD, so hundreds of years.
Through my kind of Scottish line of my family, I actually have about 1% Norwegian ancestry, according to the test. So it seems like it's disseminated, even though I don't have the red or blonde hair or the blue eyes. It's still in there somewhere. It's still mixed in. So we move on to 1040 AD. Macbeth rules Scotland, and of course, this is famous by the Shakespearean depiction. So here's a painting of that depiction by Thomas Barker.
I mean, that just
1830.
looks like an average night out in Edinburgh these days, to be fair.
No, those faces aren't orange enough. What are you on about?
That's true.
Yeah, they're not blacked up with fake tan. So yeah, obviously, of course, immortalised in Shakespeare's fictitious retelling of Macbeth, and one of the best known early Scottish kings, probably. Macbeth ruled as the King of Alba from 1040 to his death in battle in 1057. And then the article goes on to say, in 1100 AD, becoming a feudal society. So in the 12th century, the Kingdom of Alba continued to grow, became a feudal society. The Treaty of Falaise, signed by William I, ushered in a period of relative peace in Scotland. During the reigns of Alexander II and then Alexander III, more land was turned over to agriculture, trade, and the continent bolstered the economy, and monasteries and abbeys grew and flourished around the country.
Excellent. No, so this is basically evolving from a purely sort of tribal, clan-based society and now absorbing some of the social institutions of the Normans who moved in down south.
So moving on to the subheading, Fighting for Independence. This is a significant battle, 1297, the Battle of Stirling Bridge, as we can see depicted here in a painting. So they say a succession crisis brought unrest to Scotland after the death of Alexander III. England's monarch, Edward I, believed he should be recognised as overlord of Scotland, and his troops marched north in a series of bloody sieges. In 1297, Edward's army planned to cross the River Forth at Stirling Bridge. The Scots seized the opportunity to attack, and crossing the River Forth, the Stirling Bridge, forcing the English army to retreat. It was here where one of Scotland's most famous figures, William Wallace, earned his place in the history books forever. And here we can see a picture depicting the battle there, people falling in the collapsing bridge. Of course, everyone knows William Wallace from Braveheart.
Yes, they do. And if they've watched the film, they'll also remember that King Edward followed this up with the Battle of Falkirk, which basically put an end to William Wallace's guardianship of Scotland by essentially the problem that the English encountered in Stirling Bridge was that Scottish pikemen, when massed, obviously beat cavalry. I say obviously, but apparently it wasn't obvious at the time. But when it came to the Battle of Falkirk, essentially the English realised that they could destroy these pike schiltrons, as they were called, by raining massed arrow fire down on them with the longbows, which they've recently adopted.
So moving on to 1306, Robert the Bruce is crowned King of Scotland. Here he is in a nice statue in Stirling. So it goes on to say, unrest continued into the 14th century when Robert the Bruce took the throne and was crowned king. Fighting continued into 1314 at the Battle of Bannockburn, where Robert the Bruce and his army defeated Edward II, a major turning point in his rule.
Yes.
So
it's worth pointing out this is a rather selective choice of Scottish battles.
Yes.
But yes.
Who would have thought that Scotland.org would have selected the ones where they win?
Yeah, indeed.
But no, we're just firing through to show that they're in constant war with the English down south, which definitely doesn't shape the national psyche whatsoever.
And to
in
be
the modern
fair,
day.
a lot of this was about, essentially, in this point, the Plantagenets, the Edwards trying to exert influence and control over Scotland and various. And Scotland, I believe, was actually quite split. So there were some factions which were pro-England, but there were also lots of factions which were anti-England. And those were the ones led at points by Robert the Bruce and by William Wallace.
Sure. So moving on to 1320, the Declaration of Arbroath, which is a letter written in Latin and signed by the Scottish barons and nobles and sent to Pope John, I think that's the 22nd. The Declaration proclaimed that Scotland...
It's such a good name. They had 22 popes called John.
Yeah. No agenda here whatsoever.
No.
The Declaration proclaimed Scotland's status as an independent sovereign state. Though its effect was largely symbolic, the powerful declaration remains an important document in Scottish history. If you're a separatist. Many historians believe it inspired America's founding fathers to write the United States' Declaration of Independence.
That is the most
sure.
ridiculous claim I've read today, but I bet that's taught in Scottish schools now.
I don't doubt it, yeah. It's like, yeah. Any amount of freedom it stems straight from Scotland.
Yeah, this has to be.
Obviously, it's from Scotland.org, so it's going to be a bit like that.
Yeah.
But then, as you can tell by my accent, I'm not exactly going to be the most fair, I imagine.
Now, it is worth pointing out that throughout this period, there was a thing known as the Old Alliance, which was a historic alliance between France and Scotland. Now, why was this alliance a thing, do you think?
Because they both hated England,
because
of course.
They both hated England, yes. So it was strategically valuable. If England went on the offensive in Scotland, then France could theoretically send weapons and arms to help Scotland and attack England's possessions in France, because England did have large territories in Normandy at this point, which were the ancestral domain of the Plantagenets. And then if the English went and fought, say, 100 years' war in France, then they would have to watch their back against the Scottish in the north. So it was a very strategically productive alliance. Unfortunately, I think Scotland definitely came off worse in the old alliance, because they lost a lot of men in a lot of wars based on this arrangement, and I don't think France ever really managed to properly help Scotland when it was fighting its wars against England either.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.